The Rebel Capitalist Show.
I wanted to ask you how your worldview has really changed over the last, call it since 2019. And I mean, it sounds like the repo market was kind of an epiphany moment for you. And that's when you, I think, started watching some of the videos to try to connect the dots. But what's great is you've just got such an incredible history, and you can take the stories that you've lived through at an early age. And as you learn more as an adult, and now at 75 years old, you reflect back and you're like, wait a minute. Then you see your childhood through a completely different lens as well. And it's this constant learning process. So I know we've discussed it a little bit, but I'd love to dive even deeper into how your worldview has changed over the last, call it 2 or 3 years, and how you carry that into the future. And then this next book you're writing with Rickards, what do you see coming, and how can the average Joe and Jane, how can they prepare?
Well, that's, like you're primarily macroeconomics.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And like I said, macro is invisible. I mean, people are clueless and shit. They don't know what the heck's going on.
Yeah.
And so a definition of macro is a span of time also. And then you can see connect the dots and then things like this. And we've all had experiences where you see something, and then a few years later it comes true. So macro, and then I take it good that I'm a storyteller. And the reason I think I'm successful as a writer, I only write about things I've done. Most technical guys, well, the moving average went this way, and the stochastic went that way, everybody checks out. I only write stories of what I've done.
Yeah. Remember the story at the collective you told, Robert? Remember the key was, what do you know? Remember the guy told you that the guy in New York, he looked at you and said, what do you know? And and it didn't really hit you when you were in the meeting, but when you left the meeting, it dawned on you what the message he was trying to deliver. And that's what made all the difference.
Yeah. As a question for everybody to ask is, what do you really know?
Right.
And the story goes like this. I wrote, my first book was called, If You Want to Be Rich and Happy, Don't Go to School.
So maybe your worldview hasn't changed.
No, I mean, I went to school to learn how to get rich. And then I get told some religious dogma, the love of money. I'm 9 years old. I said, I want to get rich. I'm 9. The teacher goes, the love of money is the root of all evil.
Right.
And I said, am I back in Sunday school? That's a real wise head. Well, what happened was I wrote, If You Want to Be Rich and Happy, Don't Go to School. This is years and years ago now. It became a bestseller just because there's a lot of people pissed off at school, especially today. I mean, that was 30 years ago I wrote that book, If You Want to Be Rich and Happy. So Simon and Schuster calls and they said, we want to talk to you about your book. And I went, oh, thank Jesus, And the irony of it is I flunked out of high school twice because I can't write.
Yeah.
It's not that I can't write, you didn't like what I was writing, same censorship problem.
Yeah.
So I go to New York, and this guy named Bob Azahina, bless his heart, man. He was the best guy, Japanese guy like me. And he sits there, Kim and I sit there, we got, we're in New York City, we're at Simon and Schuster, and my little self-published book is going to be, He says, pretty good book. I went, what? He says, Azahina says, I can take your book, but I'm not. Fuck, I came all the way from Hawaii to sit here. And you're going to tell me I'm in New York City. You're not going to take it. You could have told me over the phone.
Yeah.
He said, I want to tell you this. He says, you haven't told me what you know. I went, what? He says, it's a pretty good book. If I'm rich and happy, don't go to school. I could take it and I could push it, but it wouldn't be a great book. You haven't told me what you know. And so at the collective, that's what I was admonishing everybody in the room. What do you know? What do you know? What are you afraid of saying in many ways? You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Especially today, 2022. But anyway, so I didn't like it. Kim and I still remember standing in front of Simon and Schuster at the Bay, dejected. We got to fly all the way back to Hawaii. And then about a year later, I'm sitting on a little cabin in a mountainside in Arizona. I said, what do I know? What do I know? What do I know? And then all of a sudden the keystrokes came out, like almost, I had a rich dad and I had a poor dad.
Right.
And that's where Rich Dad, Poor Dad came from. And if this guy Asahina hadn't challenged me to go deeper, what do you know? So that's how we started this whole thing, is that we all know something and we should say it.
And we have to be very careful about what we're learning. I think this goes to your earlier point and where we started the conversation. And those 5 people are, how you're forming your worldview. You've got to be careful. You've got to leverage the truth, the knowledge that you have through your life experience. But then you also, especially in today's day and age, with this push towards censorship and propaganda, quite frankly, you've got to be very careful about what you're learning and what you will know in the future. And, what are you doing in your own life to make sure that you're able to see the truth through all the propaganda? And I'm sure this isn't the first, this isn't your first rodeo. I'm sure you've seen a lot of propaganda all over the world, including in the United States. So what do you do and what will you do in the future to try to find the truth?
Well, that's why I think macro versus micro, where I tell I'm a storyteller. So 64, I was looking at this dime, US dime.
Yeah.
And at 64, there was a copper tinge on it. And I went, why is there I'm 16 years old in high school, what's this copper tinge doing? And I didn't know at the time. So that was 64. 65, I fly to New York and read Communist Manifesto at the Academy. 66, I'm in Vietnam. So it was like almost the sequence of events. I'm watching the Vietnam War as a midshipman, a student on board a bomb carrier in Cam Ranh Bay, Vietnam, watching this war. And so I could see the Communist Manifesto, everything he was saying coming true, if that makes sense to you. And then, as you know, George, that copper tinge has been tried by every empire throughout history.
Right.
Because the copper tinge is they took copper and they put silver on top of it. And it's Gresham's law. They debase the money. And Gresham's law says when bad money enters a system, good money goes into hiding.
Yeah, right.
And today we have the most massive crisis going. Of course, 71, Nixon took the dollar off the gold standard and all that stuff happened. But today, just because I was this kid, 16 years old, looking at my dime going, what is this thing? I didn't realize at the time I was looking at Gresham's law.
Yeah, right.
And today the debt, as his record says, the debt is so massive, it cannot be paid. So that's why Klaus Schwab and the Great Reset and all these guys step up. And, they're stacking the deck right now. They're trying to change the Supreme Court, the Treasury. And America has now become communist. And that's why I wrote this book here.
Yeah, exactly. And I, just throughout my own experience in doing these YouTube videos, and the whiteboard videos, I've got to do quite a bit of, from some of them, I've got to do a bit of research there, but my personal learning has grown exponentially since 2019, just because I've had the opportunity to continue to interview people like you and do these whiteboards. And one of the things it's allowed me to do is build a framework so I can look at the current events and see them through this framework of what I believe to be true based on extensive amounts of research and conversations with super smart people like yourself. And then I'm able to predict, I think, better what may happen in the future as far as the probabilities. So as an example, I was doing a presentation the other day that I was preparing for. And I think it's probably a presentation I'll do at maybe Kenny's event, so you'll see it. But I wanted to figure out, we talk about Klaus Schwab and we talk about the global elite and Gates and all these people. but no one can really pinpoint, what is their objective. It's always kind of all over the place. So it's this guessing game where no one really knows. And you don't know if they're behind certain things, or maybe they're just reacting to them, or just trying to take advantage of a crisis. But if you really go back and study, which I did, it takes you back to a book, which I don't know if you've read, but I'd highly suggest it. It's called The Prince, and it was by someone. That's right, Machiavelli. And if you start with The Prince and then go forward to Thomas Malthus in 1800, and then go to the Club of Rome, and then go to Kissinger, then you go to Klaus, and then you go to The Limits to Growth, which was the paper that came out in 1972. Then you start to see, and then you listen to what Bill Gates is saying today. You look
same thing.
Yeah, it's the exact same thing. It's just repackaged. And so then you look at the global government's response to, we'll call it the cerveza sickness, or this propaganda that we see towards, what's happening in Russia and Ukraine, not just on the US side, but on the Russian side as well. And then you see what's happening with China, and then you see what's happening with this push towards censorship, and you look at it through the lens of Malthus and The Prince by Machiavelli, and it all starts to make a lot of sense. I think that's how I'm personally trying to find the truth.
Yeah, but understand that's macro. I mean, because it's not about what's happening as you're pumping gas into your car or trying to buy some vegetables at Safeway. You have to go throughout history. So macro is invisible. And the average person never heard of Machiavelli, The Prince, Malthus, Ricardo, and all those guys.
Yeah.
So they don't know that history is repeating today.
Yeah, that's right. And so what was the quote, Robert, that if you don't know history, you're doomed to repeat it?
Right.
Maybe the Churchill said that or something.
Well, the other one is history proves that people don't learn from history.
I've never heard of that one, but that's definitely really good.
But I think the most important thing I could pass on today's wisdom is, who are your friends? That's what I came away from the collective, and I'm so blessed. I have you, Kenny, and all these guys, and my wife Kim she's one of the smartest women I know, and we
agreed.
Yeah, she is so freaking smart. And then I have friends who are the village idiots. I'm going, holy mackerel, why do you hang out with them? But that's their context. They hang out with poor, stupid people or highly educated people who know nothing. I mean, one of my big beefs is, just because you went to college doesn't mean you know anything. But we all know guys with their PhDs, and they think that's it, or they're doctors and all this. I'm going, but you don't know anything about money.